This is a re-recording of my very first multi-story video. Number 1. Looking at the clock. This happened back in the 1990s, long after the time babysitting became a common theme for scary movies. Personally, I didn't watch things like that at the time, so I really wasn't afraid that any of those far-fetched stories would happen to me. I was 17 years old, and every Friday night, I would babysit for the Wilson family down the street. They were a relatively young, yuppie-ish couple who went to parties every Friday and needed someone to babysit overnight for their 2 kids. I am not sure what kind of parties they attended, but they typically would not get back home until around 3 or 4 in the morning. It wasn't much of a concern for me because they paid me very well, and I liked the kids a whole lot. The children in question were an 11-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. They had a pretty typical relationship for children around that age. The boy, although the mother was not very happy about it, liked to watch scary movies and read comics. He always tried to scare his little sister when his parents weren't around. I had an older brother as well, so I knew what it was like. The boy would try to scare me too, but of course that never worked. On this particular Friday, it was in mid-fall and quite cold outside. As usual, I got to their house around 6 p.m. The parents went through their list of rules that I already had memorized. They told me what they would like me to prepare for dinner, and gave me the exact same approximate return time that they did every single time I babysat for them. It was fine. Well, after we all had a wonderful dinner, they were a pretty wealthy couple and always had lots of good food. We sat down and watched a movie. About halfway through the film, the boy, Chris, got up and left to go to the bathroom upstairs. When he came back, he plopped himself down on the couch and just kept watching the movie. When the movie was in its last commercial break, Julie got up and it was obvious she had to go to the bathroom. "Don't go into the bathroom, you'll just get scared," Chris said in a mockingly scary voice. "Stop it," Julie cried in the typical quit scaring me whine that was indicative of little girls who were tired of their big brother trying to frighten them. And Chris smiled wickedly. "I mean it. There's a clown hiding behind the shower curtain, and he'll get you if you sit on the toilet." Chris finished by making some unfriendly, spooky sounds in an attempt to further frighten his sister. "Make him stop," Julie whined, looking over at me. She obviously had to go pee. She began dancing there in her PJs and she began holding herself. "Stop scaring your sister," I told Chris, and threw a small couch cushion at him. He laughed, and then hid his face behind it. Julie looked over at me, and her eyes asked me the question without having to voice it. "I'll come with you," I told her. Getting up, I took Julie by the hand and led her over to the bathroom door. She refused to touch the knob. "You first," Julie insisted. I opened the door and switched the light on. Opening the door widely, we faced the shower curtain. "Can you check the curtain, Pat?" Julie asked. Slowly, I walked over to the opaque blue curtain. I have to admit that even for some odd reason, I was slightly apprehensive. Must have been that lingering effect from the movie Psycho that has all people slightly afraid of a closed shower curtain. Then, putting my hand on it, I paused for a minute, and then opened up the curtain. It was, of course, empty. "Would you wait outside the door?" Julie asked, and I of course agreed. When she was done, she had me come in when she flushed it so the noise wouldn't scare her, and then we washed our hands and went on our way. The rest of the night went by quietly enough. Chris had had his fun and must have decided that he didn't want to try scaring Julie any longer. Either that, or he had scared himself too, which often happened. By 10 o'clock, both kids were in bed and had been asleep for at least an hour. I generally also went to bed around 10:30 and slept until the Wilsons got home. So I got ready for bed and went into the spare room. I have never been the best sleeper in the world. I always like to know what time it is, and I would always wake up every hour or so and look over at the clock. This room had a large digital clock with red numbers on it, so I would wake up, turn around, see the time easily, and go right back to sleep. I must have fallen asleep at some point, and the last time I remember seeing the time on the clock, it was about 11. I woke up at about 11:45, saw the light of the clock, turned over, and fell back asleep. I was woken out of my sleep by a sound. Looking at the clock, it was 12:30 a.m. I heard Julie's voice. "Pat, can I sleep in here? I think there's a monster outside my window." I was groggy, but I, of course, had no problem with Julie sleeping in my room. Chris had scared her earlier, and it made sense that she was probably seeing things. Besides, having her sleep in my room with me would be easier than getting up and checking her room to make sure it was safe. Julie crawled in bed with me, and I looked at the clock. It was 12:32. I fell asleep. I was woken up again by a noise. Looking at the clock, it was 1:08 a.m. I heard Chris's voice. "Pat, I'm sorry for scaring Julie earlier. Can I sleep in here with you guys? I think there's a monster outside my window." Although I was exhausted, I chuckled a bit to myself. My brother used to always try to scare me when I was younger. I always wished that he would have ended up scaring himself, although it was unlikely. Chris was a lot nicer than my brother was, though, so I agreed and let him climb into bed. He was a boy, and it was unlikely he would learn his lesson, but I didn't want to be mean. The clock read 1:12 when I drifted off again. I woke up one more time, and this time the clock was on 2:39. I was happy that I had actually slept for more than an hour without waking up before drifting off once more. But the next time I woke up, something very odd happened. I at first thought I must have rolled over because I didn't see the clock. Being very obsessive, I knew I'd have to roll over and look at the clock before falling asleep again. However, after my head cleared just a little bit, I realized that I was facing the direction of the clock, but there was no light. I groaned, realizing that we must be having a power outage. I would never be able to get back asleep unless I knew what time it was. Right after I groaned, however, a black shadow moved, and the clock became visible at 3:24 a.m. It only took a moment for me to realize that I hadn't seen the clock, because someone or something was standing in front of it. I screamed before I realized it was a mistake and woke both kids up in a panic. "Get out of the house!" I yelled at them, and I saw the shadow coming closer. It didn't take the kids more than a few seconds to know something was wrong. Julie started screaming, "It's the monster!" Chris echoed this sentiment, and they both jumped up and ran like hell. I tried to follow them, but I wasn't fast enough, and whoever was in that room got a hold on me. I tried screaming again, but he shoved his hand over my mouth. Trying to think of what I could do, I tried stamping on his foot, and although he yelped, it only made him hold on tighter. He was way too strong, and I wasn't getting away. And I tried to console myself in my terror that at least the kids had gotten away. And I kept struggling, and he threw me towards the bed. I didn't hit it right, though, and fell on the floor. My arm hit against the bed, and I felt it crack. The man came towards me quickly, and I started crying. As the man grabbed my arm, and I prepared for the worst, I heard a gunshot. My assailant screamed in pain and fell on me. However, he didn't remain on me for very long. He rolled over on the side and grabbed his arm. Looking up, I saw the two best things I'd ever seen in my life. The father of the kids had gotten home, and apparently retrieved his gun from his own bedroom. Feeling a new rush of energy, I jumped up and ran past him. I ushered both kids out of the room, down the stairway, and out of the house. We ran to the neighbors, who had been awakened by the gunshot. They called the police, and the man was found and arrested. It turned out that the man had been trying to abduct children in the area. Both kids had already been scared because of Chris's stories that they had been sleeping lightly and were woken by the man trying to break into the house. They assumed there was a monster trying to get in their room because they had heard noises, although they hadn't seen anything. He was trying to not wake me up so he could take the kids. He, in fact, had been in the room with us, trying to pick the right moment to grab the kids. He was cautious because he had seen me waking up about every half hour or more. My looking at the clock had kept him from acting sooner. After talking to the police, the scariest part was that they told me once I had woken up, he hadn't intended to abduct me. He just wanted me out of the way. However, since he was attacking me, I assumed that meant he was going to kill me. I still sleep with a digital clock in my room. I can't sleep without one. Whenever there is a power outage, though, and I wake up and don't see the numbers, I assume the worst and start screaming. It's terrible what some sick assholes do to screw you up for the rest of your life. The show. When I was in high school, I began babysitting for the family of my best friend, who had two other children, 5 and 7-year-olds. I was a year behind my friend in school, and she had left for college, and could no longer watch her younger siblings, so being that the family knew me very well, they hired me as their babysitter. They were both really nice parents, rather wealthy, and owned a big and beautiful townhouse. Well, one Friday night, the parents had a party that they had to go to. I showed up at 7 p.m., and they didn't expect to be back until very late. As usual, this was like being paid to enjoy myself. The children were so young that they were usually in bed by 8:30, asleep by 9, and I had hours by myself to talk on the phone, watch television, and basically do whatever I wanted. On this particular night, I had been talking to my friend Steph for a while, but she had to be in bed early. She was a cheerleader, and the team had an away game the following afternoon. So by the time 10 o'clock rolled around, I resigned myself to an evening of watching cable television and eating junk food. After fixing myself a sundae covered with nuts and hot fudge, I sat down in front of the television and made myself comfortable. Flipping the television on, there was some home repair show on. A guy was mixing concrete, and he had a bunch of cinder blocks stacked up behind him. It looked like he was making some sort of wall. I couldn't care less for that sort of thing, so I changed the channel. Only, the same show was on that channel as well. Irritated, I flipped the channel again, and the same show was on. So I kept flipping it over and over again, not knowing what was going on. As I was wondering if there was some issue with the cable or something, the man looked directly at the screen, and I felt as if he were looking straight at me. This was not nearly as scary as when he addressed me by name. "Cindy, I think you need to come downstairs right away." Fear flowed through my body, and although I didn't know how to react, I knew I wasn't going to go downstairs if someone were down there. I started fumbling for my cell phone to call the police. "Don't call the police, Cindy. You won't have time," the man told me. Then I watched as he pulled the 7-year-old boy I was babysitting right in front of the screen. He started petting the boy on the head and said, "I suggest you get down here really quick." Not knowing what to do, but immediately feeling protective of the boy, I ran down over to the basement door, flung it open, flipped on the light, and after a moment's hesitation, ran down the stairs. It was an unfinished basement, and there was a pile of cinder blocks down there, but there wasn't anyone down there. I felt like my heart was trying to escape my chest and push its way up my throat and out my mouth. Somehow, I managed to calm down when I realized that whatever I had seen on the television must not have been live. Unnerved, but not nearly as afraid as I had been before, I made my way back up the steps and closed the basement door behind me. I walked over to the television, looked behind it, and saw that someone had connected a camcorder. This was long before computers and camera cell phones, to the back of the television. The video had ended, and I turned the television off. I honestly thought this was just a prank that maybe my friend had set up. She likely taped the video with a friend and her brother and had set me up. I chuckled a bit, realizing that it was a pretty good joke. Still, on the offhand that it was not a joke, I figured I should give the house a once-over. I first checked the kids' rooms, and both of the kids were just fine. I checked under their beds, in their closets, and in their parents' room. There was nothing. After checking throughout the kitchen, the den, and all of the other rooms, I was completely convinced that my friend had just played a bad prank on me. I rechecked the front door to see that it was still locked. It was. Finally, I checked out the coat closet by the front door. I opened up the closet door as quickly as I could and scanned the floor, while pushing the clothes aside so I could see if anyone had been hiding behind the clothes. No one was standing or hiding behind the clothing in the closet. I sighed with relief. "Look up on the shelf," I heard the voice from the video say to me. My first reaction was to freeze. Slowly, I looked up at the high shelf in the closet and saw the man from the video laying on the shelf, his body stretched out, his hand resting on a crooked arm, and a wicked smile crossing his face. It was horrifying that I hadn't thought to look up there, and to also know that not only was he watching me as I searched the closet, but he could have grabbed me at any moment. His smile widened. He then said to me, "I'm gonna get ya," and then he moved quickly, jumping off the shelf. Fortunately, although he was fast, he was still on the shelf in a closet, which gave me a small bit of a head start. It wasn't much though, and I didn't even make it to the door before I felt his hand grab my hair and my head jerked back. I fell back, hit my head, and everything went completely black. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. It took a while to get my bearings, and a while for my wits to come back to me. Fortunately, before I had a chance to freak out too much, my mom came into the room to talk to me and calm me down. Apparently, at some point after the attack, the little girl had got up and was looking for me. When she couldn't find me, she woke her brother up, and he was smart enough to call the police. The police came over to investigate, and unfortunately, the man and his camcorder were gone. He must have known that the kids called the cops. Fortunately, the kids were unharmed. Even more fortunately, the man was easily identified as a contractor the family had hired to finish the basement for them. That is why the boy had willingly made the video with him. The boy had told him about Cindy, his babysitter, and that is how he knew to set everything up. Unfortunately, the man had left his home and was not found by the police. Unfortunately, the police told me that they had found me in the basement, tied up to a kitchen chair. The man had his cinder blocks and mortar prepared, and he had already placed 8 cinder blocks in front of me before he fled from the house.